Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
With us now to talk about all that and more is Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. Senator, thank you for being here. Before we get to the big week of work that you have ahead for yourself, the president cashiered a bunch of the inspectors general who the Senate relies on for providing information to give oversight. There's some uncertainty about what's going on here. Are you comfortable with the move?
So absolutely. I think first of all, remind everybody President Reagan did basically the same thing. Look, these inspector generals have lost their way. And this is part of President Trump's promises made, promises kept. He said he was going to drain the swamp. Over the past several years, record amounts of improper payments from the federal government, $250 billion of improper payments. The inspector generals have turned from a watchdog into somebody who's protecting the agency. So he's cleaning house, he's starting over, and I think it's a great move.
And you're content that you'll get independent, fair-minded inspectors general to replace them?
Yeah, so there's no doubt there are some really good people there.
Right.
But I think when you sit there and try to sort out the good guys from the bad guys, sometimes you have to let them all go. And then like President Reagan, maybe you rehire some of them as well. But we'll get the reports eventually. But we need people working for the American people, not for the agency.
Okay.
Yeah, the Inspector General corruption's so bad, Trump fires 17 right out of the gate. Welcome to Whistleblower Wednesday. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube, X Spaces simulcast, Truth Social Plus, Rumble, YouTube, and Roku. Well, the IG's office is supposed to be that independent watchdog, as you just heard. It provides oversight of the organization by investigating things like whistleblower reports when decisions by leaders in those organizations run afoul of the law and policy or harm innocent people. But that doesn't appear to be what's happening. And that's why President Trump's Friday night massacre firing of the 17 IGs at the start of his administration is more than appropriate. You see, friends, these entrusted positions are actually being used to cover for bad leaders, bad decisions, and the crushing of whistleblowers. That is unacceptable and must change. Those of us with military experience with the DoD IG system, both as commanders and as working in that system, know this corruption very well, and some have organized to change it and make it work the way it's supposed to. My guest today is retired Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Swayze, a USAF fighter pilot, a former Inspector General himself in the Air Force, and founder and president of Walk the Talk Foundation. That's a nonprofit, and it provides assistance to victims of reprisal in our uniformed services. That reprisal is against whistleblowers that go to the IG. Their mission statement and vision are to, quote, to give the military member a voice when and where they don't have one, guiding them through these treacherous waters of whistleblowing. And then the vision is to realize a military free from reprisal and retribution. Ryan, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We talked last spring, I think it was, about your organization.
Thanks for having me back, Rob. Yeah, it's about almost 2 years ago now. So look how much we've grown.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I had to get you back on with the firing and those kind of things because I've been observing and I read your plans, and I know you've been involved in drafting an executive order. Just give people a refresher about what Walk the Talk Foundation is doing and what are the main flaws in this IG system from the whistleblower's perspective.
Yeah, so the Walk the Talk Foundation, we just celebrated year 3 in operation. It was born of really 2 events in my career. Like you mentioned, I was an inspector general in the Air Force. And while I did that, I saw the flaws of the system. specifically the shortcomings in the investigative process, the conflicts of interest, the coercion, manipulation by the chain of command. And then as I was finishing my career, I didn't know it was the end of my career at the time, but as my career was ending, as part of a member of the Defense Intelligence Agency, I was a victim of reprisal. And I saw that process fail me from the victim standpoint and the whistleblower standpoint. So after I retired, just shortly, within a matter of weeks, I founded this organization. And what we do is we advise and assist people going through these investigative processes, whether the administrative or inspector general, et cetera, because when you are a complainant or a subject, you are on your own. You are pro se, as the lawyers say. You have no advisement, no counsel, no lawyers, and you are pitted against the behemoth of the U.S. government, and probably by design. So we fill the niche of being in that person's corner as they go through this very arduous and many times long and bureaucratically laden process that oftentimes results in further retribution, married with a low likelihood of restitution.
Yeah, what is the? I guess I should ask, what was your initial reaction to the president's firing of these 17 inspector general?
I think the best term would be guarded optimism. The system needs to be reformed, and that I can say as a matter of fact. After 3 years of working with clients in the foundation, we're about 450 or so advisements, and the pattern is always the same. These whistleblowers who have seen a wrongdoing and many times are a victim of a wrongdoing, and they're told that they will be by law protected from retaliation, from reprisal, and then they're not. And that's by the DOD, the Department of Defense's own statistic. In fact, 98% of reprisal complaints go unsubstantiated currently. That's by the system's own admission. So that's kind of the walk they're going through there. Mm-hmm. And so, sorry, could you follow with your question there?
Yeah, on the reprisal investigation, who is tasked to do that these days?
Yeah, so the Inspector General's lane is fairly narrow. And kind of going back to what you had originally asked, which flew off into the ether for a second, was my initial reaction, which was guarded optimism because of that disconnect. So many people are told they'll be protected. So many people that are told that their concerns will be investigated with due diligence and due process, and they're not. So the system needs reform. But the removal of the head of the snake, proverbially, is just one step in that reform. And we'll talk later on the show, I'm sure, about what measures we're suggesting to bring about that holistic reform. In terms of who's doing the investigations now, going back to the second part of the question, the IG's lane, at least in the Department of Defense, is fairly narrow. It's reprisal, restriction, fraud, waste, and abuse. And then they do audit work and other things. But in terms of complaint resolution, it's pretty narrow. And then the rest is, ironically, and I think many people don't realize this, referred to command. So, in fact, the vast majority of complaints go back to the command, to the organization in which the wrongdoing was occurring or was allowed to occur. And typically then it's tasked out to some, not to be flippant, some random officer to carry out an investigation, which is another shortcoming of the system.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, and I'm assuming that things haven't changed since I was a Air Base wing commander at Kirtland, is the Inspector General worked for me. Matter of fact, I picked it.
And I chuckle because the rhetoric now is, oh, we're removing these inspectors general. They were independent, and now they won't be. I'd like to read from the AR, that's the Army Regulation 20-1, very quickly. This is the Army Inspector General Activities and Procedures. It's a very short quote. And it begins, quote, Army IGs work only for their commanders, end quote. So questions there?
Yeah. Now, one thing that did happen in the Air Force then, and again, I've been out for over 10 years now, so this could have changed, is that for the 06 level and above, if you were in command, I would never know until I did something like apply for retirement if there was an open IG investigation on me. Theoretically, I wasn't supposed to know. In fact, nobody ever came to me and said, I didn't have one, but I found out at the end when I got a call after I applied for retirement, they said, well, you don't have any open IG complaints against you, so you'll be good to go. Because there's a special office in the Pentagon that does 06 and above, I guess. And so the theory seems to be sound in that regard from the field level. But, with the conflict of interest, I just don't see how this could ever be workable if the IG's working for the commander of the organization that he's supposed to be investigating. You know what I mean? I mean, it just makes no sense.
It's a farce. It's not a tenable solution. And I saw it as an inspector general myself. And in fact, I saw it play out. There were a few contentious cases. One comes to the top of my head where I found one of the combat units to be ineffective. The wing commander who was overseeing that operation and had also hired the subordinate commanders to oversee it, summarily disagreed with that, just based on bias and pride and ego, I surmise, and changed the report. Right. So you extrapolate that to across the Air Force, across the military. You have this relationship, which I had as an inspector general. Your boss is the boss of the organization you're supposed to investigate and inspect. And that same boss holds your career in his hands or her hands, your promotion, your next assignment, your evaluation. So many times people in these positions, such as I was, are faced with this mutually exclusive decision of their loyalty to the truth and the job, loyalty to themselves and their career. And as humans, many times they just opt for the latter.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that the last few years. Well, we've got a question over in the audience. Let's go ahead and take it. Shell is our host and our Spaces audio audience. Go ahead, Shell.
We have James, sir.
Hey, thanks, Colonel, for taking my question. I wonder if you and your guest think that Trump replacing the IGs is going to help the future IGs be more effective in the administration.
Yeah, I think that's the question that's at top of mind for all of us that have some experience in this area, right, Ryan?
That's a great question, and one we see often. To clear the air, first and foremost, a lot of the inspectors general, at least at the department level, to include Department of Defense, are appointees. The predecessor, now deposed Honorable Storch, who was the previous Department of Defense IG, was a Biden appointee. So you hear a lot of this rhetoric about loyalists and paving the way, et cetera. Okay, well, then it's a philosophical discussion about what an appointee is writ large, because there are thousands of them, if I remember the Plum book correctly, quite literally, to include many of the inspectors general. The president, about a year ago now, as he was on the campaign trail, one of his 10 points in his plan was to remove inspectors general and their mechanism from the organization they inspect and oversee, because the IG has morphed from this theory of independent bastion of justice and integrity to really just a protectorate of the leadership in the institution. As far as the Department of Defense is concerned, I fully believe that's the case, and that the removal of the IG from the department, from the auspices, influences of the command, will benefit everyone and not just the president and his administration. Really, the benefit is going to be the service member.
Exactly, and the American people, because, we're paying for a product, no matter what the organization is. Well, we got to take a break, Ryan. When we come back, we'll hear a little clip from a media person that's really concerned, and this idea of independence of the IGs is really powerful, and I think there's a place even leftists and us MAGA types could agree on. You'll see here right after this break. We're talking with Ryan Swayze, of Walk the Talk Foundation, who protects whistleblowers and makes sure they get their rights. We'll be right back.
Let's start with that claim. It's not common, as you know, to do what he did with those inspectors general. The law says that 30 days before a president fires an inspector general, which of course is an internal watchdog for government agencies, he must tell Congress, tell you why. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
He broke the law.
Yeah, I think, he should have done that. But the question is it okay for him to put people in place that he thinks can carry out his agenda? Yeah. He won the election. What do you expect him to do? Just leave everybody in place in Washington before he got elected? This makes perfect sense to me. Get new people. He feels like the government hasn't worked very well for the American people. These watchdog folks did a pretty lousy job. He wants some new eyes on Washington, and that makes sense to me.
Even and especially it's one thing for a sort of run-of-the-mill political nominee. That happens, Democrat, Republican, that is the prerogative of the president. And it is on the inspector general also. But the inspector general, as I said, this is supposed to be the person who keeps watch on things.
Well, who is the keep watch on what? He wants to put people in place, including inspector generals, that can implement his agenda. Juan Pete Hexbeth. A lot of people believe on my side and the public in general, in the last 4 years, the military was too weak and too woke, and Pete's going to fix that. That's why he picked Pete. He thought the military was too weak, too woke, and Pete's going to fix it. That's why he chose Pete. So that's just the way it goes when you win an election.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and we're talking to the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Swayze, who's also a former fighter pilot and a former Air Force Inspector General. Ryan, just to touch on that little clip a little bit, the media and the politicians that don't like this all like to say that President Trump broke the law because there's some requirement in this 2022 law that says you got to make a notification. But the way the words in the law read, it says within 30 days. It doesn't say 30 days before or anything like that. The way I read it, and the way some attorneys that I've talked to have read it. But the media and the politicians that don't like it keep hammering on that. So, you're on this, but am I right?
There's quite a kerfluffle over that 30 days. I've got a fix. All right, everybody's on 28 days of paid leave, and then they have 2 days to clean their office out. Okay, it's fixed. Okay, we good on the 30 days now? Sweet. That's solved. We can move on with life. But the irony is seething because I look at my personal case. I look at the cases that we advise on and assist on clients. Their investigations are open for months and many years long. You want to talk about timing and sense of urgency. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how the IG system failed each and every one of them getting timely recourse, timely restitution, timely justice, having to live day in, day out, wondering if the case can be closed, whether if it's going to be substantiated, whether if they're going to have a job back, all of that.
Exactly.
And there's thousands of those cases. So although I empathize with the IGs removed and the timely departure with which they met their demise, my sympathy is frankly quite low because we have a lot of other cases for honorably serving service members that languish far longer and have far more ramifications.
Well, that's exactly right. And your team drafted an executive order, a proposed executive order. Let's walk through that a little bit. You went into great detail about the flaws in the current system. Go ahead and talk the audience through those flaws, and then we'll talk about your remedies probably in the next segment.
Yeah, it follows a congressional report we authored this past summer, and it's called the Independent Watchdog turned Institutions Lapdog is the short title, because the Department of Defense Inspector General system, and that's my bailiwick, really is DOD and somewhat Department of Homeland Security IG matters, has really become the institution's lapdog over the past few years. And it's attributable to some main issues, of which are training. So you don't have professional investigators and inspectors, really, by and large throughout the services. You don't have independence, an issue we addressed in the previous segment due to conflicts of interest. You don't have much oversight. There's not a lot of checks and balances on investigations or how well they're done or any kind of quality control measures. And so those are the main thrusts of both the legislative proposal as well as the executive order, to include timeliness. And so it brings it back to that whole timeline where I kind of chuckle about the belly aching about the 30 days. And like, by law, an investigator can go a decade and not close a case in the DOD-IG system. That's absurd. And we just saw, if you're familiar with the Red Hill fuel leak, we just saw the report come out after 3 years post-leak. Maybe we'll get into that specific case later. But point is that there needs to be a timeline. People need to have closure, substantiated or not. It needs to be wrapped up in a timely manner, because a lot of these cases, frankly, are getting stonewalled and stalled. So that was the meat of the congressional proposal, and you can see that on our website. And also the executive order is, let's get these people trained, let's get them independent, and let's close these cases out in a timely manner that mirrors the American system of justice.
Yeah, so let's talk about the independence. You know, the media likes the independence, like the faux independence, they say, of the Department of Justice, which is really not organized to be independent. And these IGs really can't be independent of the President of the United States himself. But they can be independent of the organizations that they're supposed to oversee. So how would that work from a wiring diagram perspective? Say, let's just take what we both know, the Department of the Air Force Inspector General's office. So that office and all of its subordinate offices down to the wing level, I assume, would have a chain of command similar to Area Defense Council, maybe? Area Defense Council are the defense lawyers, ladies and gentlemen, and they don't report to the wing commander or any commander on a base, right?
Yeah, I think there are a few solutions within the realm of possible that aren't huge muscle movements. One is you just have inspectors general that have their own chain. They're not beholden to that commander of that installation or major command or armed service even. Another proposal, too, was to make it a joint assignment. So you have a Marine officer on an Air Force installation, and he's rated by some Marine or some Inspector General somewhere else. So when he goes to that wing commander, brigade commander, whatever joint interface you want to pick, he's not conflicted. He can tell the truth without fear of any kind of retaliation. And right now, that's not the case throughout the services. There is no independence. I mean, just like we read in the last segment, the Army even says it in their own IG regulation that they work for the commander. So I applaud the media's new attention and love for independence. I fully support that. But now we've got to execute. And that way to execute is what the president has begun, hopefully.
So do you think the Air Force IG should report to the Department of Defense IG, and then that IG goes direct line to the president? Or is there some other structure there?
I like that. In the end, somebody's going to have a boss, right? And that's unavoidable. But that's also good because what's the Thomas Paine quote? A body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody, right? So there needs to be a boss, and there still needs to be oversight. So that's still going to exist. But why couldn't that investigative entity be in Department of Justice or Office of Special Counsel or something completely removed from the Department of Defense? I don't think that's off the table either as a holistic solution. But in the here and now, before we get to the larger muscle movements, so to speak, why can't at the tactical level where investigations are happening and happening poorly, quite frankly, why can't that independence be assured tomorrow?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just, the organizational resistance to that. I'll just tell you my visceral reaction when you mentioned the Marine coming in to brief me as a wing commander because he or she is the IG. I was thinking about my friend Gannon Burton, who's a retired Marine Corps fighter pilot, I think, and I go, that would be an interesting conversation. But even then, at least we're relatable. But how about a Marine battalion commander or infantry battalion commander? That gives you. But when I think about it, and I put a few seconds of time on it and get past the reaction, I go, oh, that's actually not a bad idea. When I did my one and only safety investigation board on an aircraft accident, I was a bomber type guy going and looking at a totally different type of platform with a totally different mission, but the basics of aviation and all that stuff still applied. So I think that that's entirely workable. But I like the idea of even going way out of the box from a professional competency perspective, as far as like what type of individual you are, infantry, aviation, whatever. And having a fresh set of eyes be on these reports that are coming from whistleblowers. I think that's a good idea, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned the resistance we're going to meet is the pride, ego, power dynamic there. When you have somebody telling a commander something isn't going right, that is a difficult thing to overcome for sure. But the person delivering the message who isn't beholden to them eliminates the potential effect. You can't get rid of ego, pride, power, but you can minimize the impacts and the influence it has on the investigatory process.
Yeah, well, speaking of Colonel Burton, retired, he's got a question. So let's go ahead and take that question. Go ahead, Shell.
Go ahead, Colonel Burton.
Hey, Colonels, really appreciate you. This is a great topic. I think one where I think we could say anyone has questions about Trump firing all the IGs, and especially the DOD IG, is every single branch of government had a specific failure during COVID, and that is for the COVID vaccines. We know that mandate was illegal, immoral, and unethical in hindsight. And at the time, we had some of the smartest brains in the military raising not only the concerns, but actually real data out there of the harms that were happening to servicemen. So I'd like you to talk about maybe that failure for a minute, and then maybe in the next segment go into, hey, any efforts you know of that are going to actually right the wrong and restore some trust and confidence here. Because I got to tell you, until, me personally, I'm still not at a point where I want my grandson to serve in the Marine Corps. And I served in the Marine Corps. My son served in the Marine Corps. My grandfather served in the Marine Corps. I'm a Marine Corps fan, and I would love to walk into any Air Force colonel's office today and give him the discovery on his investigation.
That's a great question.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. There's a great question and a lot to unpack there. I'll start back to front. The first thing that we're all striving to achieve here is trust and recouping the trust that's been lost in our military institution. Right now, startling statistic is how many veterans would recommend service to their children. It's down to 65%, which is a sharp decline, a staggering decline really in the last few years. And part of that trust gap comes from the opacity, the lack of due process and justice from the IG and any investigatory system, they are linked. And I fully believe, I'm in total agreement with you, Colonel, that if we can recoup this system, we can recoup the trust that Americans have in the military, and especially those who serve, and then especially those who could and would serve. So it's all linked. You go back to COVID, there's a lot to unpack there. And I liken COVID to a lot, maybe any affliction you can name that the military has confronted over the last 40 years. You pick a thing, a symptomatic thing, and I submit to you that it started and could have been curbed if we had a functioning IG or IG-like system. But the fact of the matter is, when a service member sees a wrongdoing, or is a victim of it, or witnesses a violation of law or the Constitution, right now they have nowhere to go where they're assured that it will be vetted properly and that they won't be the victim of retribution and reprisal. If that existed, now we're playing alternate universe here. If those existed, I'm sure that any of these symptomatic afflictions that have faced the military could have been curbed much earlier on. But then there's I think the follow-on question to the COVID, there was an interesting memorandum from the Department of Defense Inspector General during the COVID debacle to the Secretary of Defense. And the memo said, we're concerned, we did an audit on the exemption process throughout the military, and we are concerned that the process was not being given due diligence. That was a memo sent from the Department of Defense IG to the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and I'm sure it summarily went into the shredder there. But the point of that is that you can have the most pristine investigatory system in the world, but if it doesn't have teeth, what's the point? And so there's two facets of this problem. Number one, we got to have good investigations and independence. But number two, the findings have to have weight, and that will be something for the services to grapple with afterwards.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, we got to take another break. When we come back, I want to dive into the Red Hill incident and give you a chance to talk through all the issues that were associated with that. Because, I mean, talking about dangerous, it's extremely dangerous to kids, families, service members to have something like that go on and take so long to both discover it, remedy it, and acknowledge what was going on. So we'll be right back with Ryan Swayze on the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
The oldest trick in the political book is to drop terrible news when nobody's listening. So it was no surprise on Friday that it was the middle of the night when Donald Trump fired more than a dozen independent inspectors. These folks are inspectors general who are charged with rooting out government waste, fraud, and abuse. You can guess why Donald Trump doesn't want them watching his every move. Look, this firing is an attack on the government's checks and balances, and it will pave the way for widespread corruption. This is not the time to tune out. This is the time to tune in and hold Donald Trump accountable.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube. We're live on Rumble, Truth Social Plus, and YouTube right now, too. And our guest today on Whistleblower Wednesday is Ryan Swayze, former Air Force Inspector General, retired fighter pilot, and founder and president of Walk the Talk Foundation, which you can find at walkthetalkfoundation.org, I believe. And Ryan, I had to show a politician being mad about this, too, because it's the politicians in that body that she's in, that Warren's in, the Congress, that are the oversight of the presidency is one of their functions. He doesn't need an IG to oversee him. He needs them to do their job, doesn't he?
Yeah, and before the break, you segued to Red Hill. I have a crazy, I could refute all of what Senator Warren's saying now, but instead I have a kooky idea. I'll buy her a ticket and she can fly out to Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and she can talk to the 90,000 people poisoned by fuel in the water and tell them that their IG was doing a great job through his independence and excellence and see what the response is there.
Yeah. So Red Hill, what happened there and why did it take 3 years? I guess is the bottom line question for this Inspector General.
Yeah, shameless plug first and foremost, our podcast, The Star Chamber. We've been doing a 4-part series on the Red Hill fuel spills. If you haven't heard of it, I encourage everybody to do a quick Google on it. What happened was in mid-2021, there's a fuel facility in Hawaii that started leaking in November, leaked an untold amount of fuel into the aquifer. The official estimates vary based on whose side is speaking. And then in December of 2021, the Department of Defense Inspector General launched their investigation into the matter. And 1 week after the election results, i.e., 3 years after the investigation started, the report was released. And through those 3 years of investigative endeavors, one of the recommendations, and I'm looking at the report right now, was for the Navy to go back and determine if any wrongdoing had occurred. So to put this into context, you have a decrepit facility. You have whistleblowers who we've had on the show reporting that for 6 months prior to the spill, the fuel spill occurs. It poisons 90,000 people. The DOD IG leaps into action and takes 3 years to investigate the mishap. And the report is not released until, as my dad used to say, what a coinky-dink, after President Trump wins the election and President Biden and Secretary of the Navy Del Toro are de facto lame ducks. So why did it take so long? Well, in the opening of the report, they account for 2 years of that delay being the thorough investigatory work that they do. Of course, it's shoddy, quite frankly. And then there's a missing year where, I don't know, they were reviewing it for fonts or whatever. But that's the big question, right? Why does it take so long? Why did it take so long? What was really happening behind the scenes? And why didn't they investigate when whistleblowers said, look, this is an impending danger? What happened in those 6 months leading up to the spill? Those are two big questions that I hope the incoming Department of Defense Inspector General asks of his people.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to reopen that investigation, quite honestly.
Yes.
Were people drinking contaminated water with fuel in it?
Absolutely, they were. In fact, for 2 weeks, the Navy was extremely reluctant to even admit there was a spill or that there was fuel in the water. And we go into the show a little bit about testing discrepancies and whatnot. But yes, people were consuming jet fuel, which had seeped into the aquifer. And there are a myriad of long-term health effects for those families who suffered through that still to this day.
Now, you mentioned testing, and I'm sorry, but I know something about fuel spills on aquifers because I had one at Kirtland Air Force Base that I inherited. Fortunately, the whistleblower was listened to by the first commander, and then I pushed the throttle up when I got there and found out what was going on. But we were testing every 30 days at the mouth of water, the drinking water intake inlet pipes. So where the pumps were, we tested the water in the pumps and coming in at the inlet there every month. And I eventually made them report it to me and my deputies and the squadron commanders because they didn't like to report it. For some reason, the civilian government employees did not like reporting this. But it's very important because one of those water intakes was for, guess what? The housing at the base that I was in command of. So you mentioned the testing. What was going on with that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, a funny part of the report, not funny, haha, because of the gravity of the situation, was the DODIG investigated that. And the report is online. It's posted on DODIG website. And when they interviewed, they attempted to, they instead received a written response in response to this question. So I feel like perhaps no one wanted to go on record, but they found that the water testing was occurring in a well, and the test equipment was rented by some local Joe's water testing shop. And it was so contaminated that when they went to test the water, it would further contaminate the water. So they stopped testing. You want to use the word laughable, but unfortunately, because of the gravity situation, it's not at all. But something you touched on, Rob, from your experience was you as a commander were presented with that information, and you had one of two paths: is, oh, okay, I can kind of cover this up, and hopefully I leave, or PCS, and I don't have maybe I have plausible deniability, or I can just say, look, something's happened and we're going to head it off. And you opted for the latter. Unfortunately, it appears that the Navy did not do that. And there's an element now that is introduced, which probably wasn't a factor, maybe not a factor in your story, which is the military-industrial complex and the millions and millions of dollars that go into these contracts to maintain the fuel facility, contractors who more than likely knew it was substandard. More than likely, we're not reporting that to Navy leadership. You have Navy leaders who are retiring and going to those firms. So you have a very nepotistic system there that probably was a factor. But again, we can't say for certain because the IG didn't look at that, and it's not in the report. So it's a very diplomatic cop-out of an investigation for something that took 3 years inexplicably.
And that gets back to this issue that these IGs, and I think it's outside the DOD system too, and all the other IGs that have gone to protecting their institutions instead of protecting first the public and second, protecting the individuals making the whistleblowing things who just want to do what's right and make sure things are being done right.
That's the thing. What baffles me for every case, I look at the average whistleblower, and they know it's a very high risk, low probability of quote unquote reward, but they're doing what's right. We've had the Red Hill whistleblower on the Star Chamber podcast show, Shannon Bentz, who blew the whistle. And she knew going into that process that she was going to be summarily crushed, which she was. But she's not grinding an axe, and she doesn't have a chip on her shoulder. She just aimed to protect lives and do the right thing. And a system that purports itself to be the protectorate of that very person, the person doing the morally just thing, fails them and has failed them time and time again. And that is why we need reform.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've got to take our last break. When we come back, we'll hear about IGs running rampant. That's the other part of this problem is they're not just protecting their institution, they're operating outside the law quite often. And Ryan's got some examples of that, I know, because he's written about it and talked about it on other shows. So we'll be right back with Ryan Swayze of Walk the Talk Foundation. You can find him at walkthetalkfoundation.org and the Star Chamber podcast, too. I failed to mention it at the beginning of the show. Go check that out. We'll be right back on Whistleblower Wednesday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
Now, Army security agents have escorted the Inspector General of the US Department of Agriculture out of her office after she refused to comply with her firing by the Trump administration. Phyllis Fong reportedly told colleagues that she intended to stay after the White House terminated her, saying that she didn't believe the administration had followed proper protocols. Army, look, these lefties, they can try as hard as they can, but why bother going up against Trump orders?
Yeah, first of all, hey, IG, it's not your place to interpret the protocols and the legality of your firing, right? And that's the problem I think we have the IGs in general. I think they were they had a world onto themselves. They felt they were disconnected from the law. They could do whatever they wanted. And that was the problem that Trump had from the beginning. Look.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday. My guest is president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, Ryan Swayze, a former USAF fighter pilot, Air Force Inspector General. They do work protecting whistleblowers and also are developing and have proposed actual fixes to the problem in the IG system. And Ryan, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but it's hilarious that a person that's appointed by the President of the United States doesn't understand or refuses to understand that when she's fired, it's time to leave, either voluntarily or be forced to leave. I don't get it. I mean, I have my commission hanging on the wall. It says, at the pleasure of the President of the United States is what it says. If he fires me, he fires me.
Well, if there's a silver lining, I would encourage her, if she felt she was treated unfairly, I would encourage her to file an IG complaint.
Yeah. So in your experience, and I've seen a couple of things from you on this, I just wanted to touch on it. This issue of IGs thinking that they don't have to follow policy and they don't have to follow the law. I think that applies to the DoD IG system, too, in the upper echelons, more than likely. I didn't see it at my level and below, at the wing level and below as much, if at all. I don't recall ever witnessing anything like that. But I do know about it at these top levels. Obviously, there's the most public incident of it in recent times. But why do they think they could get away with that because on the one hand they think like that, but on the other hand they're in the business of protecting institutions instead of doing the real job that they're hired to do. That's what is.
It's multifaceted for sure. We had this thing in aviation, Rob, it's called as you know, the normalization of deviance, which is when you start to accept the littlest of deviations from procedures, rules, law, it starts you down a slippery slope, and where the end it's like a free for all. There aren't many bylaw statutory really things that an inspector general has to do. One of them, by law, they have to notify a complainant every 180 days of the status of the reprisal complaint. It's a silly law. I mean, it's a good law, but it doesn't shape the path of an investigation. But it's routinely violated. Just like we chuckled 2 years ago over Freedom of Information Act timelines, it's a law. Right? The Freedom of Information Act is a law, as is Title 10 U.S.C. 1034. It says you'll be notified every 180 days. And although you may say, okay, it's minor, that's fine. But the point is, it's indicative of a culture that brazenly accepts deviations from the rule of law. And that's what, to me, is striking. And you marry that with the fact that there are really very few checks and balances on the Inspector General system, and really the administrative, quote unquote, justice system writ large. I could ask a rhetorical question: is who is the IG of the IG? So when an IG fails, where do you go to? And the answer is really no one. There's a council, but they're veritably worthless. And so it is this body who has run autonomously for many, many years and done so without checks and balances, and where the culture has deviated to where laws and investigatory process and due process and rights, they kind of are an afterthought. And that's the culture you see in the Inspector General mechanism writ large today.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, I mean, we have all these like even senators and stuff that say, hey, we want whistleblowers to come tell us stories, and they're not exactly the Inspector General, but it's still a whistleblower there's a whistleblower process and a set of laws that have been passed to protect whistleblowers from things like reprisal. Where are the wheels? But the wheels are off the machine. Where are the wheels off at that? And we keep bringing this up. Hey, the whistleblowers are getting retaliated against. I talk to people every day, especially from the pandemic, that were in uniform or are in uniform that still feel like they were retaliated against, and we have the evidence. So, how do we get that set of wheels back on track? Because I think you have to do that in order to build confidence back up in any system that the president rebuilds on this in order for people to actually use it.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics don't lie. Department reports of its own volition that 2% of complaints are substantiated. That means 98% of complainants are told they're liars or they're wrong or I don't know, they're out to lunch or something, right? I think it starts first with the Congress. You mentioned the committees. There are committees that oversee the Inspector General system, the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee, specifically in the Senate. There's the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. They're another self-purported overseer. And this is where a disconnect that still kind of baffles me, because despite the fact, and if you see our petition for an independent system, we're up to 3,000, despite the fact that there's 98% of complaints go unsubstantiated, despite the fact that there are tens of thousands that have signed the Declaration of Military Accountability and would vouch for what you just said, everybody seems very comfortable with it. And I can understand that from the military standpoint, because the IG is just another arm of abuse of authority. So they have this veneer of independence, and they have this entity they can say, well, the IG found ... The unspoken rule is, well, I really coerced them into that and finding, right? So it's a very symbiotic relationship, and that's why I understand that exists. But from the Hill perspective, one exchange we had with Senator Duckworth's staff was like, hey, this is the problem. And they acknowledged that. And there was a mixture of sympathy and apathy, which was, oh, gee willikers, that stinks. That sounds like a really difficult problem. Why don't you write legislation to fix it? And that's the general vibe we get when we're shopping this around the Hill, was like, okay, this is bad and it's a known problem, but the solution is even tougher. So yeah, we'll just accept the status quo. It is what it is. And that's what we're trying to work through now with our proposed legislation and executive orders.
So as we close this out, we started the show with, you kind of said that, you had guarded optimism about President Trump's firing of the 17 and everything. What do you hope to see the public policies are that come out of the presidency that will take you from guarded optimism to applause, dancing on the decks. What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, I would like to see all the points of our legislative proposal / executive order be implemented. And it starts with the independence. You've got to remove the inspector and the investigator entity from the chain of command. I mean, this is not rocket surgery, and it's not unprecedented either. They did it with sexual assault in the military. It got to a point, whether you agree with it or not, that the military was no longer trusted to prosecute those cases. So the pattern exists to separate functions from the military, from the chain of command. It was just done. So why can't it not be done for the inspector general? That's one. And then we need laws to institute timeline, better training, et cetera, for that. And if we get that, then that's the whole enchilada. So if I were king for the day, I would execute immediately, separate them, and then I would train them, because right now they get literally business days of training. They being inspectors and investigators. It's woefully inadequate. And then I put a timeline such that people aren't languishing in these investigations, whether complainant or subject, for years on end. And that's an 85% solution right there. And that would, I think, do momentous strides in recouping some of the trust that, quite frankly, doesn't exist in this system now.
Yeah, it really doesn't, from what folks I've talked to. And I signed the Declaration of Military Accountability, so I talked to a lot of the folks that have signed that quite frequently. That's how I found out about you, matter of fact. When you see, what am I looking for here before we close out? One more question. When you see actions like what President Trump took and behavior like this IG, and you're thinking about the troops and they're seeing this stuff, what should supervisors be telling the troops right now, moving forward, for their own good when it comes to IG complaints, following the law and policy?
Oh, unfortunately, there's the theory and the reality here, Rob. I would say, if I were a supervisor, retain the faith and follow the process. You still have to play by the rules, unlike as was demonstrated previously. And you have to show good faith, and you have to exhaust all the avenues of recourse that exist in the here and now, whether they're working healthily or not. You still have, you still, it is expectation of you as a service member to use those because you're entitled to them, but then to use them such that they're exhausted. So maintain the faith. And then I would also close with saying, for all the people who have sympathy and empathy for the now deposed USDA Inspector General, I have sympathy for them as well. But I also have far more sympathy for the tens of thousands of service members betrayed by the IG system in the last few years. And for that, the removals of these inspector generals is long overdue.
Yeah, we've got to fix the system. I like your approach. Let's keep working on that, and I'll keep it as public as I can keep it. You guys keep up your great work, and go check out the Star Chamber podcast with Ryan and Francesca, right?
Yeah.
If I remember your code.
That's right. Yeah.
So thank you very much, man. I appreciate your time. This has been a great show. And folks, look, it's extremely important. One of the things Tulsi Gabbard is signed up to is to fix the whistleblower process on the classified information side, because the lack of one or the weakness of one is how Edward Snowden was a result of America doing bad things by spying on its people. He had no pathway to appropriately report it that he could have confidence in, and he broke the law by releasing the information that he did. So we've got to get these fixed, because it's very dangerous, not just for public health, but for our country to continue with this weak system is not only wrong, it's unethical, and it's inhumane. I'll see you tomorrow on Truth Thursday on the Rob Maness Show.